It started with a game. Not a metaphor. An actual game, charades of all things. We were hosting one of those smug little weekend get-togethers where people pretend to be more charming than they are. Everyone had wine-stained teeth and opinions about books they hadn't finished. I was sitting on the armrest of our couch, balancing a half-full glass of Merlot, watching her act out some film I hadn't seen. She was laughing loud, sharp, deliberate. And the man guessing? He laughed too. Every guess was wrong, every movement from her more exaggerated than the last. She was making a show for him, not the crowd. The others clapped along, oblivious. I watched the way her mouth curved when he said her name. She had told me once that she hated it when people shortened it, but not with him, apparently. There's a kind of violence in pretending everything's fine. Like duct taping a cracked dam and smiling while the water builds. I didn't say anything. I clapped. I sipped my wine. I smiled for the photos someone took. I even laughed, a sound that felt like it came from someone else's throat. Later that night, after the guests had filtered out and the house smelled like wax and leftovers, I found her outside on the back porch. She was barefoot, her toenails still painted from a salon trip I'd paid for 2 days ago. Her phone was in her hand. The light from the screen made her look younger, crueler, too. I asked her who she was texting. She didn't even flinch. No one. I nodded. I knew that tone. I'd used it once before, years ago, when my mother caught me sneaking out with my cousin's cigarettes. Flat. Practiced. Not meant to convince, just to shut down. I walked inside without another word. The silence between us followed like a scentless fog, something thick but invisible. Something wrong. The next morning, the air was different. She was chipper. Cooking. Bacon. Toast. Orange juice. It was all too cheerful. Like an apology in breakfast form, but without the apology. She asked if I wanted to go hiking that weekend. Hiking, something we hadn't done in months. I said yes, even though I hate hiking. I watched her eat in silence, watched her scroll through her phone between bites. The screen reflected in her eyes again. I told myself I was being paranoid. But paranoia, I've learned, is just intuition with better PR. What cracked me open wasn't some grand confession or scandalous text message. It was a sock. A single sock. Gray. Expensive. Not mine. Wedged between the washing machine and the wall like a buried bone. I picked it up. I turned it over. I stared at it like it might blink. I knew every sock in that house. I do the laundry. She hadn't even tried to hide it. I waited 3 days. 3 days. I put it in her drawer. Right on top. She didn't say a word. That's when I knew. Not suspected. Knew. I didn't confront her immediately. No. I wanted to see how far she'd go, how deep the lie ran. I started watching, quietly. Not like a spy. Like a man in his own house trying to understand why it suddenly felt like a stranger's. I tracked nothing and everything. Her shower times. Her silences. The way she no longer laughed with me, only at me or worse, past me. One night, I left work early without telling her. I parked 2 streets away and walked home. My heart wasn't pounding. It was too tired for that. I just felt cold. Not scared, numb. There was a black sedan parked outside our house I didn't recognize. Clean. New. Plates from out of town. I stood on the sidewalk, hidden by the hedge, and watched her bedroom light flicker on. It was daylight, but she'd closed the curtains. 15 minutes later, it turned off. Then the shower. Then the light again. Then silence. I waited. Long enough for a cigarette I didn't light. Long enough to feel nothing and everything all at once. The front door finally opened and he came out. He looked like the kind of man who talks more than he listens. Tall. Confident in that manufactured way. The kind of guy who treats charm like a business card. He walked to his car, checking his phone. No goodbye. No backward glance. She didn't even come to the door. He drove off. I walked inside 10 minutes later. She was in the kitchen, hair wet, in that oversized sweater she only wore after showering. She smiled. Asked if I wanted pasta. Pasta. I sat across from her and said, "Who was the man in the sedan?" Her eyes didn't flinch. That was worse than if she had. What man? I repeated myself. Slower. She shrugged, turned back to the stove, and said so calmly, so monstrously, "Probably someone lost." What does it matter? I stared at her back. At the way her hair clung to the sweater. She knew I knew. I knew she knew I knew. But she wouldn't give me the dignity of honesty. Not even a lie that made an effort. Just air. Just smoke. Just this blank, echoing dismissal that somehow hurt worse than a confession. I pushed the chair back and left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I went to the park we used to visit before things went quiet between us. I sat on the bench near the fountain and stared at a mother feeding crackers to her son. He giggled every time a bird flew too close. His laughter felt foreign. Like a song from a country I no longer belong to. My phone buzzed. A text from her, "You're being dramatic. We'll talk when you've calmed down." I turned off the phone. And in that moment, sitting beneath the sycamore tree that used to be our favorite spot, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want her to explain. I wanted her to admit it. Because if she admitted it, I could burn everything down. I came home at midnight. The lights were off. No message. No calls. She hadn't even asked where I went. I stood at the door for a moment before entering, just staring at the knob. There was something ceremonial about it, as if I wasn't walking into my house but into the remains of it. I opened it slowly, not to be quiet, but because I needed the extra seconds to decide what kind of man I was going to be when I walked through it. She was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes half closed like she'd been dozing. Netflix played something she wasn't watching. I stood there waiting for her to speak. She didn't. So I did. I know. She blinked once. No, what? And there it was, the insult. Not the betrayal itself, no. That I could have survived, maybe even forgiven. But this, the choice to deny when caught, to play the role of the confused, wounded party, this was where the blade twisted. I walked over to the drawer in the hallway and pulled it open. I threw the sock on the table in front of her. Her eyes glanced at it like it was a bill she didn't want to pay. Still, she said nothing. Whose? I asked. She leaned back, crossed her arms, then finally gave me something. That's what this is about, she said, voice light, amused. You're spiraling over laundry? I saw him leave, I said flatly. I saw him walk out of this house. Our room. I watched him get into his car. I counted the minutes. She didn't flinch. Just blinked slowly and said, then why ask me? Because I wanted to believe you'd lie better. That's what I wanted to say. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at her, really looked. And I realized something. She didn't feel guilt. Not even fear. She felt contempt. Not for the act, but for me, for being weak enough to need answers. I'm done playing house with someone who plays games when I'm not looking, I said. She exhaled, long and slow, like I just wasted her time. You think I'm the only one who's checked out, she said, standing. We stopped being anything real a long time ago. You just didn't notice because you liked pretending. And you liked hiding. She tilted her head, gave me a look that chilled me straight through. Don't blame me because you were too dull to keep my attention. Silence. Heavy. Acidic. I nodded. Walked past her. Took my coat from the rack. Where are you going? She asked, almost bored. To remember who I was before you decided I wasn't enough. I left. I drove aimlessly, hands steady, heart not. I ended up in a diner 2 towns over. Sat in the corner. Ordered coffee. Burned my tongue on the first sip just to feel something immediate. A man in the booth behind me was laughing too loudly. A waitress dropped a fork. The world didn't care. It kept moving. And somewhere between the second and third cup of that bitter, burnt coffee, I understood. I wasn't mourning her. I was mourning the version of me that trusted her. I stayed at a motel that night. One of those no-name roadside places where the air conditioner rattles like it's choking on its own dust. The room smelled like bleach and old secrets, but it was quiet. Empty. No perfume on the pillows. No half-smile across the dinner table. No second toothbrush beside the sink. I laid there for hours, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. Don't blame me because you were too dull to keep my attention. There are sentences that don't echo. They detonate. That one left a crater. I didn't sleep. I left at dawn and drove to my friend Will's place. We hadn't talked in months, but I needed something familiar. When he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't ask anything. Just stepped aside and let me in. That's the kind of man he is. We talked. Not much, not deeply. Just enough to keep the silence from chewing through my ribs. I told him the basics. Not the sock, not the shower. Just the ending. He nodded like he already knew. She always treated you like you were an extra in her movie, he said. You just never wanted to read the script. I left his place with no real plan. I couldn't go home, not yet. Not until I figured out what that word even meant anymore. I spent the day driving. Past the lake where we used to camp. Past the bookstore where we picked out our first novel together. Past the dog park we said we'd visit when we finally adopted. I was tracing the corpse of our life like chalk around a body. Outlining the places that used to feel like us. By evening, I was parked outside my daughter's school. She was 17. Smart. Quiet. The kind of girl who kept her anger in poems she never let anyone read. I texted her, I'm outside. Just want to talk. No pressure. She came out 15 minutes later, backpack slung low, headphones around her neck. She got into the car without a word. You know, I said. She didn't answer. But the silence said everything. For how long? Her voice was small. A while. That broke something I didn't know I still had left. You knew and didn't tell me? She looked at me and her eyes were glassy but sharp. She said if I told you, you'd leave? And I couldn't lose both of you. I nodded slowly. Then she added, almost a whisper, and I thought maybe it wasn't my place. You're my daughter. Of course it's your place. She looked away and then, with a voice that cracked like a window in winter, she said, If you destroy our family over mom's little affair just because I didn't tell you, you're not my dad anymore. The words hit me like a car at full speed. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there, stunned, watching my reflection in her eyes vanish. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't drive her home. I just drove. That night I disappeared. No calls. No letters. No explanations. Not for a week. Not for a year. For 8 years, no one knew where I was. 8 years isn't just time. It's erosion. People think disappearing is some dramatic, cinematic thing, a thunderstorm, a slammed door, headlights fading into the fog. It's not. It's paperwork. A quiet job under a different name. A small apartment with walls too thin and no photographs. It's switching coffee shops just in case. It's deleting birthdays from your phone so you stop being reminded that time is still marching without you. I went north. Changed my number. Took whatever work I could get. Warehouse at first. Then carpentry. Something with tools and silence. I liked fixing things. Wood doesn't lie. It tells you exactly where it's broken and lets you make it whole again. People don't give you that. I built a new rhythm. Wake up. Work. Eat. Read. Sleep. No mirrors. No news. No mention of the girl I once called my daughter or the woman who let me fall out of her life like a lost button. I didn't date for the first 3 years. I couldn't. Even a smile from a stranger felt like an ambush. Trust was a language I no longer spoke. But eventually, slowly, she found me. Her name was Lena. Not loud. Not flashy. She worked at the hardware store where I bought sandpaper and nails. She remembered my name after 2 visits. Then my order. Then my story, what little I gave. She didn't pry. She waited. We talked. Then walked. Then shared coffee on cold mornings. I told her everything on our 6th walk. Every rotten piece. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, eyes steady like someone who knew grief not as a guest but as a roommate. You don't have to pretend with me, she said. No one had ever said that before. It wasn't sudden. But it was real. And after 5 years of silence and self-exile, I asked her to marry me. Not in some grand speech or candlelit dinner. Just me on one knee by the lake with a ring that wasn't flashy but meant I'm ready to believe again. And just as I pulled out the ring box, she appeared. Not Lena. Her. My daughter. A ghost made of regret and time and something more complicated than pain. She was crying. Not little tears. Full body, shaking sobs that cracked the air. Dad, she said, voice trembling. I'm pregnant. I need money. Will you help me? Lena stepped back, sensing this wasn't her moment. I stood there, ring still in hand, past and present crashing like thunder in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I said something no one, not her, not Lena, not even I saw coming. I put the ring back in my pocket. The lake was silent. Not even birdsong. Just wind and water and the weight of a moment stretched too far. My daughter, no, the girl who once called me dad, stood there in front of me, swollen with a life she couldn't support, cheeks wet with sudden urgency and eyes begging for something she wasn't even sure how to name. Please, she whispered. I have no one else. I stared at her. Not like a father. Not like a stranger. Like a man trying to find his own reflection in a cracked mirror. You told me I wasn't your father anymore, I said, voice calm. Too calm. I believed you. She flinched. Real pain. Or maybe just surprise. Hard to tell after 8 years. I was 16. I was scared. Mama. Don't, I cut her off. Don't bring her into this. You made your choice. You watched me disappear. You let it happen. For 8 years, not a word. Not a letter. Not even a question. You lived with her lies. Now you want my help? She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her shoulders shook. I didn't know how to find you. You didn't try. Lena was still standing nearby, quiet, patient, but I could feel her heart clenching through the silence. This was the man she agreed to marry. Now she was seeing the wreckage he'd buried beneath steady hands and quiet eyes. My daughter took a step closer. I don't want money for me. It's for the baby. I don't know what to do. I looked at her and something inside me split in two. One part screamed, told me to walk away, to finish the clean break. The other part, the quieter one, remembered rocking her to sleep in a moonlit room. Her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. Her first word. Her first lie. I'll help, I said finally. But not for you. She blinked, confused. For the child, I said. Because that baby didn't ask to be born into the mess you've inherited. Her lips parted, but I wasn't done. And you will not call me dad. Not until you've earned it. She nodded. Too quickly. Desperate. I hated how easily the relief came across her face. I'll wire the money, I said. But this doesn't erase what happened. You don't just knock on the door of a life you burned down and expect to be let in. She opened her mouth again, but Lena stepped forward, gently placing a hand on my arm. Let's go, she said softly. We walked back to the car, the ring still in my pocket, my past trailing behind us like smoke from a fire I thought had long gone cold. But it hadn't. It never really had. We didn't speak on the drive back. Lena stared out the window, her fingers laced tightly in her lap, while I kept both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road like it owed me an answer. The trees passed by like shadows, blurry, empty reminders that time doesn't stop even when your mind's still stuck 8 years in the past. When we got home, she turned to me before stepping out of the car. "Do you still want to marry me?" The question landed like a stone. She wasn't accusing. She wasn't crying. She wasn't fishing for reassurance. She just wanted truth. And after all I'd said about honesty, I owed her nothing less. I looked her in the eyes. "Yes," I said. "But not tonight." She nodded once. That was it. She understood. We went inside and didn't speak again until morning. But sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing her voice. "My daughter." Those 3 words, "I'm pregnant, help me." They looped in my skull like a broken radio. I didn't regret what I said, but I couldn't pretend it hadn't shaken something loose in me. The next day, I wired the money. Enough for the hospital. Enough for clothes, food, some dignity. I made her promise it would go to the baby. She agreed too fast, like someone who'd learned to say the right thing, not necessarily the true one. Then I changed my number again. That week, Lena and I didn't talk about the proposal. We didn't talk about the money. We focused on the kitchen renovation we'd been putting off. Tiling. Cabinets. Something real. Something with structure. But the silence between us was different now. Not heavy. Not angry. Just waiting. Until Friday night. She came into the living room with 2 mugs of tea and said, "I want to meet her. The baby. If you ever let her back in, I want to see who she becomes." I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded. But what I didn't tell her, what I still haven't told anyone, is what happened the day after I sent the money. An email. No subject line. No greeting. Just one sentence. From my wife. Not my wife. Not anymore. It read, "If you think I'm going to let you walk away from this like the hero, you're wrong." No name. No signature. Just that. And in that moment I realized something terrifying. She wasn't done with me. Not even close. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes. The cursor blinked like a ticking bomb. The words weren't elaborate. No threats. No insults. But they carried a weight that chilled me deeper than any courtroom or confrontation ever could. "If you think I'm going to let you walk away from this like the hero, you're wrong." It wasn't guilt she was after. It was legacy. She knew I'd rebuilt something. Heard whispers maybe. From our daughter? From someone else back home? It didn't matter. What mattered was that I had escaped the story she wrote and now she wanted to rewrite the ending. I didn't respond. Didn't delete the message either. I left it there like a loaded chamber, unread but understood. That night, I locked my office door. Lena knocked twice. I told her I needed time to work. She didn't push. That's the kind of woman she is. Trusting. Or maybe just careful. I sat with a notebook and pen and started writing everything down. Everything. Not for revenge. For protection. Just in case the storm came back, and this time it didn't knock. The next morning, there was another message. "She's telling people you abandoned your daughter. That you refused to help. That you left her pregnant in the street." Attached was a screenshot. A post. Social media. Comments from people I hadn't thought about in years. Mutual friends. Her cousins. Strangers with opinions. I didn't feel rage. I felt clean. Cold, but clean. Because now I knew the game. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about punishment. About dragging me back into her version of events where I was the villain who disappeared instead of the man who was forced to vanish. Where she was the wounded, discarded wife and I was the one who couldn't handle a little mistake. I showed Lena. She read the message then looked at me with steady, unwavering calm. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. I just closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled. Then I said, "I want to show her that I didn't survive her just to stay silent." And that's when the real plan began. No yelling. No lawsuits. No public drama. But the truth? The truth has a pulse. And I was going to let it breathe. I didn't go to the media. I didn't post a single thing online. What I did instead was simpler, sharper, and in the end more devastating. I wrote a letter. Not just to her. Not to my daughter either. But to everyone who had read the lies, to the mutuals, the family friends, the sideliners who had all suddenly found themselves righteous in judgment. It was long. Brutal in its precision. Not angry. Not defensive. Just factual. I wrote about the affair. The sock. The man in the sedan. The silence. The confrontation. The way she smiled while denying the truth with no shame. I detailed the night I disappeared not as a man running from responsibility but as a man shattered by betrayal and banished by the people who should have defended him. And I ended it with this. 8 years ago, I was erased. Not by death, but by dishonesty. My daughter told me I was no longer her father if I dared confront the reality of what her mother did. I left because I believed her. I stayed away because I thought it was what they wanted. Now, I know it was what she orchestrated. But I came back not to clear my name. I came back because someone I loved asked for help. And I gave it. Quietly. Fully. Without applause. That's who I am. And that's all I ever was. I printed 10 copies. Sealed them. Sent them by mail to the right people, not out of vengeance, but as preemptive truth. Then I posted the letter to a personal site I hadn't touched in years. I made it public. And I left it there. No hashtags. No shares. No drama. Let the silence do the work. A week passed. Then the calls began. Not from her. Not from our daughter. From people I hadn't heard from in nearly a decade. Some apologized. Some asked if it was all true. Some just said I didn't know. But I didn't need their approval. That was the freedom. The beauty. I hadn't written the letter to be believed, I wrote it so I could breathe again. Then came the message I wasn't expecting. From my daughter. Just 2 words, I'm sorry. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit there. Simmer. That night, Lena and I sat on the porch. The stars were out. Crickets humming like they hadn't a care in the world. She looked at me, wineglass in hand, and asked, what happens now? And I said, now we live. And we stop letting ghosts write our story. A month later, I saw her again, my daughter. She asked to meet. Not at our house, not hers. A neutral space. A library cafe tucked in the quiet corner of the city, far from eyes that gossiped. She was nervous. Paler. Shoulders tighter. Motherhood had clearly carved something new into her, something fragile and urgent. She brought the baby. A girl. She looked at me with the wide, curious eyes of someone who had no idea what came before her, the betrayals, the silence, the broken versions of the people standing around her crib. She didn't care about stories. She only wanted warmth, safety, a steady hand. And I held her. Not because I forgave. Not because I forgot. But because she was untouched by the damage and maybe, just maybe, I could be the first good thing in her life. My daughter watched me, lips trembling. I believed her, she said, voice like wet paper. I was a kid. I didn't know how to choose between you. I didn't answer. I just rocked the baby gently. I see now, she said. She twisted everything. Made me think you left because you wanted to. That you gave up on us. I looked up. Not angry. Not pitying. Just level. She didn't twist anything, I said quietly. You let her. And I let you. That's what hurt the most. You had the power to pull me back and you never used it. Her tears came fast, sharp. I'm trying now. I nodded. And that was it. No reunion hug. No melodramatic forgiveness. Just 2 people trying to relearn the language of trust, one hesitant syllable at a time. In the weeks that followed, we started small. She sent photos. Updates. Sometimes just a sentence or 2. I responded with advice, not affection. I wasn't ready to call her my daughter again. Not yet. But I wasn't shutting the door either. Lena and I married in the quietest ceremony I could imagine. By the lake, just us, 2 friends, and a promise not built on grand gestures, but on survival, patience, and the sacred act of staying. After the vows, I walked down to the shore alone. I didn't think about the woman who betrayed me. I didn't think about the house that used to be mine or the laughter that once echoed in its halls. I thought about the man I'd become, not in spite of the betrayal, but because of it. A man who had vanished. And returned. And in doing so, wrote an ending no one saw coming, not even him.